So what happens with modern philosophy? I'm going to talk for 5 minutes and then go to Jumain. Okay? In the 17th century, something very interesting. I'm jumping because really the medieval period is more or less colored by Plato and Aristotle. Just 3 interpretations, particularly in Europe. We as Muslims were doing something very brilliant and very innovative, but it was biasly taken out of history. Okay? I'm going to talk about it in a second. But let's focus on what was happening in the 17th century Europe. 17th century Europe was marked by a very interesting idea. If you go to any museum and go to 17th century sections, you can easily trace it. What were the biggest objects that kings and queens were giving as presents to each other in the 17th century? That's a real question, if anyone can answer. Anyone went to a big European museum in Germany, France, England? What was the obsession of the elites at that time? To the extent that kings, actually the Ottoman Caliph used to send some of them to the Queen of England, to the Elizabeth. Thank you. What clocks? Okay, what about time? Let's go. You are absolutely right. It is clocks. Okay. What is it about clocks? Did anyone see those 17th century clocks? How do they look like? They are usually half the size of this desk. They are huge. Okay, and you usually make the walls from glass. Okay, and what is inside the glass? The gears of the clock. Why they were so obsessed with gears, mechanical engineers, because of the idea of mechanics, which came out of Galileo, and Newton. The idea that the world is a machine, it doesn't have anything transcendent. Reason is immanent in matter. Plato and Aristotle, if you think about it, okay, had a very basic assumption. Reason should govern matter. Reason is up there, it is divine, even though they were pagans, but they had an idea of divinity, okay, and it is governing matter. But it's separate, and it has to be separate. They are completely committed to this idea, whether Plato or Aristotle. Okay? Suddenly, in the 17th century, matter is in this world. What also happened in the 17th century? Rasmus is a little bit earlier. Something very important. Something that brought all of those immigrants that started America and Canada. Thank you. The Protestant Reformation. Okay? And what was the main statement of Luther? He has a very famous statement. Every Christian will be a priest. We don't need something that is transcendent. Everything will be immanent in the material individual. So the interest in immanence, okay, was very much mirrored in that material mechanical view of the world and science. Now, how did that manifest itself in all? 3 minutes. Let's take the first one. Spinoza. My favorite of all, more than Hobbes actually, because he was far more intelligent, I think, from my humble perspective than Hobbes. And he was actually, by the way, he was one of us in a certain way, because his ancestors, any Jew who has A at the end of his last name, were usually descendants of the Jews of Spain, of the Moors. And his family immigrated, and actually we know now, historically, that he read, okay, many of the great Andalusian, so we know for a fact that he was reading Averroes, we know for a fact that he was reading the famous mystical philosopher Ibn Arabi, and from there he got the idea of the one substance, because Ibn Arabi was a monist, and this is why he was accused of hulul, of pantheism and so on. Sure, you know the story. But he read all of that literature. But anyway, let's go back to his famous and brilliant theological political treatise. Mr. Spinoza did 2 things. The first thing is that in his epistemology and metaphysics, he denied that there is anything that is transcendent. Everything is immanent. And he says God equal nature equal the one substance. State. Okay? And reason and matter map each other. It's not reason that is trying to govern matter. It's not that you have to go from matter and strive like a good Platonist or Aristotelian to arrive at the forms of reason, and within that have some kind of a spiritual ascent as well as that. No, matter is reason, and reason is matter. In other words, get God out of it. And if you want God in it, make God matter. Okay? And he actually supported that by a truly brilliant, and you have to give it to him, reading of the history of the Bible, of biblical history. He said that prophets were using imagination, and he actually got that immediately out of Al-Farabi, because Al-Farabi was the first one to develop that theory. He said that the philosophers have I have a paper coming out in Ethics very soon about that. And it's about the theory of imagination and natural laws in Farabi versus Aquinas. And but Spinoza transposes it. Farabi thinks that imagination is a very good thing. Spinoza thinks that imagination is an animal thing, just like the soul. And in other words, he was saying that prophets, because they were in primitive societies, they dealt with those primitive people by approximating ideas to them in terms of religious doctrines. But now, since matter is God and God is matter, and reason is advancing at an accelerated pace in understanding how matter functions, thanks to Newton and Galileo and all of that gang, we no longer need religion. If you actually read very deeply inside the theological political treatise, what he's really insinuating is that religion should be done away with. Because at a certain point, with the progress of material sciences, you reach that. What happened is that we didn't need even to wait until the great works of quantum mechanics to know that reason and matter are not the same thing simply because of the probability theory. And we go back again to the huge dichotomy between reason and science. I'm sure all of you know Heisenberg, correct? Anyone here basic physics? I mean, he was of course very complicated, but usually people in high school. Anyone knows Heisenberg? Heisenberg, Werner Heisenberg. What is the famous principle of Heisenberg? Uncertainty, which is what Ungenauigkeit, which means that on the atomic level, you can never determine what matter is. In other words, you put it in Spinoza's language, you can never have a rational discourse that maps out. In other words, bye-bye Spinoza. Okay? His claim that the progress in science will at one point, okay, make all rational claims explain matter in full was completely destroyed by quantum mechanics. But he didn't even have to wait until quantum mechanics, because already from the 18th century, 1 century after Spinoza, the big movement of skepticism started in England. The British and Scottish and Irish empiricists, okay, and they started casting questions. So some 18th century tried to save the promise of reason. But before we go there, so the sovereign for Mr. Spinoza, even though you had to go through the covenant, he was one of the first to put out the theory of the constitution that we have nowadays. He made two very interesting things. The covenant comes out of material rationality, just like Hobbes. So it's the natural progress of reason that you choose. And of course, the sovereign has to be rational. But he made a very interesting move away from Plato and Aristotle, which I hope now it will be very clear to you after the explanation, the background idea, is that he, for the first time, probably one of the first people who defended democracy. Why? Can anyone tell me why? Because reason is matter. Okay? So whenever you reach a level of the development, okay, and progress in rationality, the material individual political subjects constituting the body politic or the city or the polis or the society will be rational enough to make the covenant, and the sovereign who will rule them, okay, will be able to also rule them rationally. But until we get to that stage, Spinoza, like Hobbes and all of the 17th century thinkers, said that we have to forfeit all our will. This is why the state at that time was called the Leviathan, the monster. Okay? You had to forfeit all your will to that sovereign. Now, as I said, skepticism cast doubt on that theory. Hence, for instance, starting from the 18th century, you get the idea of separation of powers. And hence, in American language, and I'm sure it's here as well in Canada, checks and balances between the judicial authority and the legislative authority and the executive authority, and so on. Comes Kant and the amazing generation of German philosophers, And they say, well, maybe Spinoza took it too far. Let us reduce the struggle between the transcendent or the claims, the universal claims of reason, and the empirical claims to just human consciousness. Menschliche Bewusstsein. I did my PhD on Kant. So I spent a big time of my life on this guy. So what Kant tried to do is to limit, first of all, the wild claims of Spinoza, even though his immediate successors, Hegel and the German idealists, would go back to Spinoza. But forget about that for now. And at the same time, and he was a very humble Protestant man, limit the claims of knowledge. So instead of talking about matter and reason in a very general way, matter is always presented to me, vorgestellt, represented to me, according to the conditions of the possibility of knowledge. And my consciousness has a separate part of it, which is the moral part. I don't want to get you into all of the complexities up front, I think it's very easy. Which is the ideas of reason that do not have any material content. And he said we have three ideas: God, the world, and the self. The easiest one to understand, of course, is God. Can you experience God in space and time? No. Of course not. So what do we do with those ideas? We said our understanding of the empirical world is completely mechanical and let it function on its own. And then our moral judgment, okay, should be completely intellectual. And I'll give you the famous example, the promise is binding. Okay? He says, why do we think that the promise is binding? Because the concept of the promise itself, okay, implies that you have to fulfill it. So if you do not fulfill the promise, you will be contradicting. And you will not be respecting your reason, and hence you will not respect the essence of your distinction from any other being in that mechanical fabric of nature, which is your capacity to transcend the mechanical order of nature. You are above it. And this is why you are highly amazing, as he calls us. He said humans are highly amazing. That is, holy beings. Okay? So, and what is holy about us is that transcendent dimension of it. And he said that those three ideas, I'm not going to go into the technicalities of that, are used in our moral arguments. Hence the idea of the moral religion of Kant, the famous rational moral religion. You can Google it after this talk, you'll find many Wikipedia very easy articles about it. Okay? But again, did he solve the problem of the relation between the transcendent and the eminent? Hell no. Because once you say, let's go back to the promise, correct? I told you that the promise is binding, correct? And then I actually executed the promise. Right? Once the promise is actually executed, it becomes part of nature. And hence, you will understand it mechanically. And actually, if you think about it, every one of you will immediately see that. Let me give you an example. You fulfill the promise to a friend. You actually can ever be sure that your friend will think that you fulfilled the promise because you actually respect the moral law and you did it out of your respect for your freedom as a rational subject? Or that friend of yours might think, oh, he fulfilled the promise because he's afraid I'm not going to give him a ride next week to the movies. Or I'm not going to pay him back what I owe him. Or she's going to get angry at me and tell bad things about me to my mom or my friend or whatever. Okay, so you can always explain any action in a natural mechanical way once it becomes in the domain of space and time. Okay, now when we extend that to the politics of Kant, it got to be a huge problem. He assumed that societies, okay, apart from that problem of finding a way for you to feel the impact of your moral, rational decision on reality, which is a huge problem in this philosophy, okay, because once the action is done, it becomes part of nature. Another huge part, is that he assumed that human societies will get to a level that is too good to be true. That everyone will act out of their Achtung, respect for the moral law, and that with education and enlightenment, because that was the age of enlightenment and the French Revolution, and from now on we'll worship reason and not worship God and all of these big things, which never crystallized actually. But that was the assumption. So it failed. So the idealists come again and they relapse in a horrible Spinozism. But this time it gets really dangerous. So when you read someone like Hegel, for instance, in Reason and History, And I remember my advisor back in Munich, he says usually people associate Nazism with Heidegger and Nietzsche, two other German philosophers, but actually the origins of Nazism are in Hegel. Hegel is so clear, he says, the rational, he wants to get out of that duality. Is everyone following me? From Plato and Aristotle? He wants to get out of that duality, but now the duality is in the subject. So the only solution for him is that the subject becomes absolute, and the absolute subject becomes a state. And he is clear about it in the introduction to the philosophy of history, that a rational society that has the right to overrule the world, he actually says that exact language, okay, is a state where the individual is completely overcome by the power of the Staat, of the rational state. That's Nazi Germany. Because Nazi Germany, yes, it was an unmitigated evil, but at the end of the day, nobody can deny that Nazi Germany was the most scientific, rational state in modern history. Give me a single state, a single political experience that you can think of in the 20th century that was as rational, as scientific as Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany, sorry. I doubt that. They were even in the way that they killed people, they were very scientific, very efficient. And this is why they were ruthless. As Heidegger said it in one of his essays, The Question Concerning Technology, reflecting as a Nazi, because he was a member of the Nazi party, about the evils that they have done in World War II. Okay? So, what is the solution? Now let's look at Juwayni.